Welcome to the FMCG Guys, the podcast that dives into the innovation, strategy, and trends shaping consumer goods and retail in Europe and beyond.
Welcome to the FMCG Guys podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Torres. When I'm not hosting this podcast, I'm the Director of Executive Search at Dwyer Partners, recruiting top talents in consumer and retail. And guess who we speak with here? Indeed, top talent, leaders, and luminaries in the consumer goods and retail industries. We're now actually over 170 episodes in, so we welcome you to go into our website, www.fmcgguys.com, or your favorite podcast platform to entertain yourself and hopefully be educated with some of the industry's top voices. And do remember, we are part of a family of podcasts, which is headed by the CPG guys in the US. In case you didn't know, CPG means consumer packaged goods, and virtually what here in Europe we normally call FMCG, in the US they call CPG. So they are the CPG guys. And if you tune into their podcast, you learn all about the omni-consumer world in the US with some amazing guests, and also twice a week, and also like us on Wednesday and Saturday. And if you haven't yet, remember to follow us on LinkedIn, where you'll join a community of 15,000 plus members and counting. And you'll find basically our latest episodes and other industry news, some content that we only share there, like video content, for example, and so on and so forth. So accompanied by two luminaries of the industry today. On one side, somebody that if you're a regular on the podcast, you'll probably remember, Efrain Rosario. Hey, Efrain, how are you?
Good, Daniel. Nice to be with you as always.
Likewise. Are you enjoying the pre-Olympic Parisian summer?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to believe that it's less than, I guess now 15 days away. So
can you see anything like in the city?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, some of it I think is still under construction. So fingers crossed that it all gets done. But no. You can definitely start to see where things are going to be. And actually parts of the city are starting to close off. And access will become a bit of an issue. So yeah, it's exciting. It's gonna be a fun couple weeks here in late July and August.
Do you think you'll be much in the city in that time period?
I think we will be here when we have a ticket or a QR code to be allowed in. So access is going to become interesting. Yes. So for those of you listening who are planning on being in Paris during the Olympics, make sure that you've got your access codes to get in. Otherwise, you may find it difficult.
You don't want to be on the wrong side of the river. So,
correct.
And the other side of this virtual table, we have another luminary, another leader of the consumer goods industry, who's currently the chairman at Cellese Regenerative Therapeutics, that's comes with an amazing experiences in both FMCG, consumer healthcare, private equity, dermatology even. So with no further ado, hello, Walter Geiger. How are you doing?
Very good, Daniel. How are you? Thanks for having me, and hello to your 15,000 plus followers.
Hello. That's all of them answering back. And we've heard that you're not in a bad place either, spending some days in the Côte d'Azur, right?
That's correct. Yes. And by the way, because of the Paris Olympics, we're going to have the finish of the Tour de France for the first time in Nice.
Ah, wow! I didn't know that. Well, that's pretty exciting. And are you going to be there for that?
Yeah, I hope so. I hope we can make it.
Excellent. Well, Walter, thanks for coming. And first of all, maybe it could be interesting to understand, what are you currently doing? Because as I said, you come with amazing experience, Procter & Gamble, Johnson & Johnson, private equity, Galderma. What are you currently doing as chairman of Cellese?
No, I had a wonderful opportunity, Daniel, to take on sort of my first chairman of the board role for a derm dispense skincare brand. And that brand or that company got bought by Archimed, which is one of the leading private equity company in healthcare. And they basically took a majority position in that company in April. And they asked me to come and help them with some of the board work. And I'm partnering with a wonderful CEO who is also the co-founder, and a great management team and a great product.
And after being like a president and of business unit, like a kind of CEO role before, how is it to be the chairman?
It's very different, because what you need to do is you don't do directly things. You help other people, enable them. You ask questions and so on, right? You provide guidance and so on, and make your network available. But to be honest, it's only 3 months. So please talk to me later in a year or two from now for experiences.
Yeah,
Well,
I'm still learning.
You're in that honeymoon phase, Walter.
Announcing Walter Geiger Part 2 coming next year, maybe.
Yeah. So Walter, it's exciting to hear about this new opportunity you have, and like you said, the fact that you've had to kind of adapt your leadership style to be more of the influencer and the person who leads alongside as opposed to in front of a team. I'm curious though to hear about your experience prior to joining your current company, and thinking about your role in Galderma and leading up that consumer business unit, because as Daniel said, that was really in essence serving as that CEO role that you're now working alongside.
So what also helped me there, Efrain, was also the fact that I was working for a private equity company. So EQT bought the Galderma business out of Nestlé. So it was called Nestlé Skin Health at that time. And in 2019, in October, they closed the deal. And then they were looking for a new management team to establish a joint team in 2020 at the beginning. So I was heading one of the 3 divisions. There's an aesthetic division, there's a prescription division, and there is a consumer division. And I was heading the consumer division. And the mandate was clear from the beginning to take the growth from single digit to double digit. Because as you know, private equity company typically have a value creation plan, and a limited time they want to hold an asset.
Yeah, no, I imagine. It's it's fascinating. We've had a couple of guests that have worked in the private equity space, and it's always interesting to hear their perspective in terms of the difference between that and a publicly held company in that instance. But for your specific situation, like given that directive and given that ambition to double the growth in a short amount of time, what I guess, can you tell us a little bit just about how that, I guess, how you went about doing that? I guess at a high level, in terms of like what were the levers, let's say, that you started to pull to make.
And if I can add a bit, and if I can add an extra point to that, also interesting that the Galderma was owned by Nestlé before. So going from Nestlé mindset to private equity mindset must have been an interesting journey as well for you to be leading.
First of all, I had a wonderful ownership in EQT, which is the majority owner, and they are growth-oriented, with a growth-oriented private equity company with a strong integrity, right? So, was partnering with a company like that is fun. Second, there was an enormously talented management team, like Fleming, the CEO, Thomas, the CFO. I mean, there's just phenomenal people that were around me, leading the company, and so on. So that was wonderful. And I think the main sort of success story here was focus. So focus on a few brands. I inherited a portfolio of more than 10. We focused on one primarily. 3 second tier, focused on few geographies, few markets, and focused on few, how to win interventions or growth drivers. When you have limited time and limited budget, that's always the most important thing.
Yeah, so it's a trade-off, no limited time, limited budget, focus on like what you're good at. I get a bit of the Pareto rule, no? Focus on that 20% that will deliver more growth. And we're talking private equity here, but actually your background and where you started your career is actually in a very different place. So you spent 25 years at P&G. Tell us a bit about that.
So the like most of the people that I think join P&G, they join it for the brand management training, the academy company approach that they have, and then they want to leave it sometime. Yeah, I had the same sort of intention at the beginning, so I joined in Austria, health and beauty care. This is when the whole thing started. But every time I got a new opportunity in front of me, that was challenging and new. So, for instance, I went from Austria, where I started. I got the opportunity to work in Indonesia, health and beauty Indonesia, emerging markets. That's where the future of the FMC industries. Then I got the opportunity to work on a franchise, which was also, I've never done that before, just to kind of take a brand and run it on a global basis. Then I got the opportunity to go and become a general manager in Japan for the health and hair care business. So on and on and on. I stayed for 25 years because every assignment was another growth opportunity and a wonderful way to develop both on a professional but also on a personal level.
Yeah, because, I mean, looking at your LinkedIn profile, you have Vienna, Jakarta, Frankfurt, Geneva, Kobe, Japan, Singapore, Cincinnati. So yeah, probably they gave you the right reasons to stay, it seems.
It was a hard time, though, convincing my wife to move from Singapore to Cincinnati.
Yeah, you bet.
Yeah, no, that just shows your skills as a salesman,
as an influencer.
Yeah, and as an influencer, because that is not necessarily the easiest of sales. I think it's interesting that like you said that you like a lot of people who join P&G early in your career. You definitely are say intrigued by opportunities outside, but I think what you just said in terms of like how a company like P&G, one that's as big as it is and offers as many opportunities, that's part of the appeal, right? Which is that you do get presented with new opportunities and new ways to continue to advance your career. And then, like Daniel said, it's not just geographically, but I think it's also in terms of like increasing responsibility as well, right? Because you went from marketing director to GM, and then you started taking on more and more responsibility as your career went on.
That's correct. I think that the ability to grow in a company, I think, is one of the easiest way to have a loyal workforce, right? So I mean, this is what we all growth and personal development is what we all want.
I think it's giving the high performers the right challenges, right? And having that high performing environment. And Walter, one thing that we talked about when we were preparing for the podcast and so on is the fact that even if you were in Procter and Gamble, I think it would be good to make a bit of like clarifying around that. You're really passionate about working with challenger brands. And so, in other words, with brands that are not necessarily the leading ones in their category, but the ones that are maybe number 2 or number 3. And that's been a bit, from what you told me, it's been a bit of like a common theme in your career.
So the reason why, I've always liked to work, and maybe not at the biggest brand in the category, like a Tide or an Ariel in laundry or in Pampers or something like this, is because all eyes are on you. And there's an army of people, and there are many things that have been done before, and I think the whole playbook is very scripted. When you work for instance, a brand that I had the pleasure of working for early on is Head and Shoulders, which I was a franchise leader for. Head and Shoulders is a dandruff shampoo, right? And if you think shampoos or hair care, you think Pantene or L'Oreal Paris or what have you. But you don't necessarily think about a dandruff shampoo as a big or important or successful shampoo brand, right? But we figured out by working with consumers that the people want superiority efficacy, it's like anti-dandruff efficacy, but they also want beautiful hair. If you give them both, frankly, then the sky's the limit for the brand. And so Head and Shoulders takes a different take on the category. Basically, superior scalp care leads to better hair as opposed to just hair care, right? And the brand became $1 billion. It's much bigger these days, and it's the #1 shampoo brand.
No, it's interesting because, I was actually having a conversation with somebody just this morning where we talked about, that, yes, there are certain categories that are more emotive than others. but even, let's say, quote unquote, low involvement categories there's a story there, right? And I think it's brilliant what you said, which is that if you're able to give them both the emotional benefit of great hair with the functional benefit of like dandruff removal, all of a sudden, like, you've got a winning formula for sure.
Yeah, you resolve attention, you resolve something for the consumer, and all of a sudden, you unlock the potential.
Yeah, absolutely. But I also love how you said that, sometimes when you work on these challenger brands in a big company, you have a bit more freedom. You have a bit more room to play, right? Because when you're dealing with the crown jewel in the brand portfolio at these companies, sometimes, like you said, all eyes are on you, and yes, you have freedom to do things, but as long as it's from one of these three things, right? It's all very, very scripted. So it's great to hear, like you said, that when you're working with challenger brands, it's this opportunity to have a bit of a play in the sandbox.
You can also easier exceed expectations.
That's smart. But isn't there like a bit of a thing out there that says that you have to work in a brand that's like leading the category?
Well, yeah, like, or Jack Welch, right? Which is like, you want to be the number one or the number two brand. Otherwise, why
Yeah, so I think let's not. I mean, I'm sorry, but we need to kind of define challenger brands. So a challenger brand is not the brand that is number 120, right? So we're really talking about even bigger brands that basically have a certain segment, or maybe brands that were a little bit overlooked in the company, right? So, for instance, another example I could give you is Cetaphil or Cetaphil in Galderma, which is a derm endorsed skincare brand, right? And within Nestlé, it was an important brand, but it wasn't the number one or two brand, right? But when we took it on with Galderma, it basically, we saw a huge potential there because that segment, that market is growing fast. And the brand had a wonderful founding story about gentle skin cleanser and sensitive skin. And the majority of people have sensitive skin, or at least claim or think that they have it. So by addressing the needs of people with sensitive skin in a better way, and doing basically marketing a brand that is derm recommended, or the number one derm recommended brand for sensitive skin, that unlocks a huge potential, right? And again, that type of thinking. Now, Cetaphil wasn't a small brand. It was 700 million, right? But it was not the main brand for Nestle, right? You think of it, and there were many brands around, like a La Roche-Posay or a Eucerin. But thinking about the point of difference, like what is that brand really standing for? What does it stand for? What need in the market does it meet? What segment does it address? And then driving that point of difference, science behind it, and the endorsement, and then just making sure that you have points of parity on all the other aspects of the brand, like the e-com is fine, or I don't know, you have a good social media presence and good brand activation.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good point, because there's a lot of brands that are sitting in a category that maybe the leading brands, the number one and number two, are not really investing that much or innovating because they've been there for so long. And then just like you, maybe the number three, and just by reimagining part of your marketing, your value prop, really understanding your consumers. You said, I love the part of sensitive skin, because I think I have sensitive skin as well. then that really appealed to me directly. And going back to your career, Walter, one thing that I thought was super interesting is that the fact that a lot of times when people leave Procter & Gamble, as a quintessential example of a leadership school, they go and work for the usual suspects, right? Like other big multinational conglomerates that we all know about. But you did something very, very different immediately. Like, you left Procter & Gamble as a VP, which a VP in Procter & Gamble is a very senior position, and you go and work for the Carlyle Group, which is one of the big private equity companies. Like, what kind of crazy person does that?
I really believe, or I call this period my executive MBA. So don't forget, it was 25 years in one company, and a great company, right? With wonderful leaders. I mean, so many, senior leaders, CEOs come from P&G. I mean, even outside of the company and so on. So I really want to underline that it's a great school and academy and so on, but there's one way of thinking about things, right? And by being able to kind of work, and I not only worked for Carlyle, but I worked for a different private equity company. I was self-employed. I was essentially doing due diligence at that time for potentially new deals. But that exposed me to many different ways and business models and ways of thinking. People in the private equity industry typically are very smart, have experience across multiple portfolio companies, go through many deals. I mean, there's like 100 deals, 100 companies you have to almost like go through to make one deal or so, right? So there's a lot of experience in this industry, and the speed decision making was phenomenal. So I cherish it very much as my executive MBA.
Yeah, so sorry, I correct myself. You worked with a number of private equities, in which Carlyle Group was one of them, which in some ways is even crazier, right? To go like from P&G to being self-employed and doing gigs for private equity. I think it's like super interesting. And I guess that what you learned basically was that
I had to do my own expense reports, yes.
Yes, exactly, which is one of the things that I hate about being self-employed, I have to say.
So Walter, it's you mentioned, like you said, that this period of working, being self-employed and working with all these private equity firms was your executive MBA. Are there one or two things that, from a, I guess, skill building perspective, that you think that experience would serve to be beneficial for other executives, especially those who maybe, like you said, had been at one company for a long part of their career?
I mean, I've done it, so I have to basically say that this was a good idea. But joking aside, I think if you think about it, right? So there are more brands and more businesses that are privately owned than publicly owned. So if you really want to sort of really approach the total universe of companies and opportunities out there, you almost have to think about that part of the FMCG business. The second thing is that there's tremendous opportunity for personal growth, right? Doing things differently, doing things faster, and then I can tell you there is also a financial upside, right? There's a financial upside for the owner of the business, but there's also a financial upside for the management in a private equity held business that goes to the exit.
Yeah. It's a more entrepreneurial gig in general, no? With all the pros and all the cons, if you like it, and also that I think that the decisions are taken in a more. I think in private equity you have more. It's a more gritty environment. Like you have more relation with what's happening outside of the company. The decisions that you take are more relevant, and you also have more freedom to take them. It's interesting because we had one interview here a few months ago, a guy called Martin Frisch that's done stuff with private equity, and he said so many more decisions would be taken in a publicly owned company if they thought like a private equity, right? And he did an exercise in a publicly owned company, which is like, if we were in a private equity, what would we do in this situation? And it was completely different than what you would normally do in the publicly owned one.
But you're absolutely right, Daniel, that cash and P&L is something that you really, really have to watch when you work in that industry.
Yeah, exactly. And how did you bring that experience and insight into private equity when you went back into a corporate environment? Because you actually went to run you went to run Eastern Europe and Central Asia for J&J afterwards for 3 years, which is also a very interesting thing, and based in Moscow as well. So in those type of markets, I think typically publicly owned companies do tend to be more entrepreneurial. But anyhow, you were in the big machine. What did you learn? What learnings did you take there?
So that's why I always believe in sort of lifelong learning, and the executive MBA helped me get better in running businesses, working with teams. But I think where I specifically applied the learnings that I had coming out of the due diligence work was more in the M&A, the mergers and acquisition work. So many companies want to grow organically. It's always the organic growth playbook is always there, but inorganic can be a very nice way of step changing growth, right? So that's where I spent some time in Johnson & Johnson, later on in Galderma.
Yeah, it's interesting because you do hear, and this is true for a lot of the guests that we've had actually, where we talk about what are the ways that you can drive organic growth for your brands in terms of, some of the fundamentals that you referenced earlier, even in this conversation, in terms of like your marketing strategy and your commercial execution. But it's interesting that, like you said, private equity got you more experience on the inorganic growth side, which is, to be honest, it's like, it's almost like it becomes like a mini course that you could do for people who are working in brands and corporate brands, that they should go and do almost like a stage or a secondment at a private equity firm to learn some of these things.
But then you also learn then, of course, what the seller is interested in, right? And what is motivating the seller when you're the buyer, and vice versa. So it's nice to know both sides of the coin.
I'm getting some ideas. We'll have to chat offline. We don't want to give our $1 million idea away, just like that.
So one question that I had, which is that, now, like you said, that you've done your executive MBA in private equity, you've come back and you've reassumed leadership roles back in corporate brands. I'm curious, how do you see this, like, this next phase in your career, and all these experiences? How have they benefited you at this point going forward?
It's the way I feel about building a career really is a journey. That you start, when you're coming out of university, and then it builds, right? And what I like always is to have a fresh new challenge, right? So, for instance, working now as a chairman, it's new for me. I've not done this before. It's a wonderful business in California. It's an industry I know, but it's just a new assignment. I've just joined sort of Achimed, the company that owns Cellese, as an operating partner. And again, this is where I'm going to apply many of the things that I've learned over my last 30, 35 years. But I think the most important thing in our industry is it is fast-paced, and there are so many opportunities, right? And the way of stringing things together for a great learning journey, personal development journey, I think is most important.
Absolutely. No, and I think that that's part of like what can make a career great is really like being aware that it's your journey, and you have to be on the driving seat of that. And that if you want to take the most of that journey, sometimes you have to go out of the motorway and go through the smaller road, because then you'll find greater things, right? And I think that that's a message that I think is worth sharing with the part of our audience, which maybe in the first 10 years or 15 years of their career, or maybe 25 years of their career, that sometimes there's a certain level of perceived risk, which sometimes the risk is not taking that risk. If that makes sense.
No, I think, one of my greatest learning opportunity was definitely going to Indonesia when I was, 27, 28, because it was a road less traveled. But that was also a very, very important lesson in business, and how to deal with inflation, and how you make a product accessible for emerging markets.
I'm sure, but you went to Indonesia in the 90s as well, which must be a very different Indonesia from what it is now.
Well, and it's funny because we haven't even in this conversation, we haven't touched on the fact that, like, the fact that you've been exposed to so many different cultures and throughout your career, in terms of, like, if you just start naming all the places that we've named in where you worked, in between Moscow, Indonesia, Frankfurt, Switzerland, now the US, it's a pretty impressive list and a pretty diverse cultural map for us to look at.
I'll write this one down for the Walter Geiger Part 2 episode we'll do next year.
So. Yeah, exactly. Exploring Walter's cultural map.
Exactly. There we go. So Walter, one last one, and this is one that we ask all our guests, which is, if you went back to the very beginning of your career and you could give yourself one piece of advice with everything that you've learned until now, what would that be?
So I think one of the things that you said already, which is the taking risks, taking opportunities, I feel I have done, right. So raising the hand when there was an opportunity, I feel this was something that I can recommend, right? Because people that say yes are typically the ones that get the new opportunities. But if there was one thing that I would do differently is I would broaden my functional skill base. So, I grew up as a brand, a classical brand management marketeer, and I had, of course, a sales training. But a 2 or 3 year stint as a sales rep or as a key account manager, I think would have helped me in my early career. Maybe even sharpen my skills. Finance, right? So not only read a book about finance or, I don't know, read some financial statements or so. No, just do a full-fledged 2 to 3 year assignment in finance on a deal, on a project where you really, really get exposed to it, right? Now, I know that the younger generation anyway is good at this, right? So they want different experiences, I understand, but that's what I would probably do differently.
No, that's great, because also like the younger generation may want it, but the managers may not be aware of it. So good reminder for people that are doing succession plans for people in companies. If you want to keep these people engaged, give them those cross-functional moves at least. Efrain, tell me, what are your key takeaways from this conversation?
There's quite a few. I think this has been very insightful. I think not just in terms of like hearing from Walter's experience, but also how you internalize some of the things he said is like almost like like personal guidance or coaching for us as individual leaders. To me, I go back to what we talked about towards the beginning, which is really reveling in the freedom that you have in working for one of these challenger brands. And I think, one, just even clarifying what we mean by challenger brand, I think is really important. But I think just recognizing what you can do in terms of, being able to take more risks and being able to really experiment a bit more and, do things that maybe the top one or the top two brands within a company's portfolio, just are really kind of hamstrung from doing. To me, I think that's something that is one worth calling out, but two, I think worth celebrating.
Yeah, and linked to that, probably worth also taking that private equity approach that for example, Walter took at Galderma, which is like, you have limited time because you're private equity backed. You have limited budget. So you really have to focus on like the strong points that you have. So within that scarcity mindset, sometimes you can do extraordinary things. And that's happened repeatedly with companies with smaller budgets that have overperformed their category.
Well, I think, there is a certain level, and one of our mutual friends, Daniel Kent, always says this, is that when you work in that PE or in that startup world, you develop a skill of being scrappy and being very resourceful. And I think, having that urgency. And I think, all that leads to not being complacent when it comes to how you're managing the brand or even how you're managing your own career as well.
And if you can combine that scrappiness with that best practice background, that makes wonders, right? I think that's like really the key to succeeding in more entrepreneurial environments.
Absolutely. And I think, the last thing for me, and this is something that we touched on towards the end of this conversation, was it's never too early and it's never too late to own your own learning journey, right? So whether you're like at the very beginning of your career, as we kind of asked Walter to put himself into, or if you're 25 years in, there's never a wrong time to really take ownership for your learning journey and finding those opportunities, whether they be at your existing company or whether they're, taking a risk and going into a completely new world like private equity, or, going and transitioning from being somebody who's, led marketing their whole career and then moving into a GM or a CEO or a president role. I think to me, that's something that all of us can learn from.
Yeah. I have a few more actually. So like going like remembering that more businesses are privately owned than publicly owned, which seems obvious, but I think that in the world we live in of consumer goods, sometimes we forget about that. So that's an important reminder. And I thought that what was very interesting is that private equity, what Walter learned about inorganic growth, super interesting, and one that publicly owned companies should have in mind, because as they're looking for growth and M&As have been a bit slow lately, so it seems like they're going back. Important to remember that private equity does have maybe a better playbook to do the acquisitions and then to integrate them.
Yeah, no, I think it's there's something there with regards to how do you build that muscle if you're kind of spent your whole career focusing on organic growth. I think there's something there. Maybe something for us to talk about in a future episode.
No, I think that many of the companies, right, they have a department that deals with it, right? Now, I think the better models actually is if you spread sort of that M&A activity across the teams in a company, right? Because even if the deals doesn't come through, the learning for the team, both in terms of what they've learned about the market and about the consumer understanding, competitive understanding, and competitive intelligence, but also the personal learning of just talking to people that see the world in a different way.
No, absolutely. I mean, this was for me an amazing learning. So hope we summarized this well enough, Walter, that we did justice to our conversation.
You've done very well, Daniel.
Excellent. Well, thanks for joining us. Thanks, Efrain, as well. And thanks to our audience for accompanying us once more. If you've liked this episode, I tell you this every time, but remember to please leave us a review, because this will really help us show up more and that other people in consumer goods like you can listen to us and these amazing conversations we're having. Have a great day, and we'll see you in the next episode of the FMCG Guide.